Hello, friends. It's Amy Goldschlager, and I am here to welcome you to the November edition of the New York Review of Science Fiction Reading Series, produced and this evening engineered by, of course, Jim Freund. And unfortunately, Barbara Krasnoff, who is the third member of our joyous trio, is unavailable this evening, but we all send her our best, and we hope that she will be here soon. But this evening, we are extending spooky season for another week or so. And here is my spooky persimmon spritz in its spooky champagne flute, which is fun for everybody. And we have, of course, the spooky Terence Taylor coming to read for us and to give us a little Q&A. Unfortunately, we'll probably not get to get a view of his wonderful spooky black cat Shuri, but I'm sure she's around somewhere and will be lending cat vibes of spookiness throughout the evening because we love her. I will just, as we begin, remind everyone that while, of course, this reading is open to everybody on YouTube and Facebook Watch, but of course it is not free. This software is not free. Jim's equipment is not free. So if you are able to make a donation to the Hour the Wolf PayPal at paypal.com/PALME/OurWolf, that will, of course, be gratefully accepted. So, of course, you don't really want to hear me blather anymore. So I'm going to introduce our reader, Terence Taylor, who most recently has an amazing story in Out There Screaming, which is an anthology edited by Jordan Peele and also John Joseph Adams, who is a favorite dude of mine. And here we go. Terence Taylor, terencetaylor.com, lives and writes in Gowanus, Brooklyn, with its spooky, spooky, spooky canal, with Shuri, his black cat and part-time muse. After years of comforting kids with award-winning children's television written for PBS, Nickelodeon, and Disney, among others, he turned to scaring their parents in print. His short story Plaything appeared in Brandon Massey's Dark Dreams, the first horror-suspense anthology of African-American authors. Terence's work was in the next two volumes, and his short stories and nonfiction essays have since appeared in Lightspeed, Fantastic Stories of the Imagination, Nightmare Magazine, What the Bleep Is That?, the saga anthology of the monstrous and the macabre, the Canterbury Nightmares, Out There Screaming, and more. His first novel, Bite Marks, was a modern-day Grand Guignol about the unintended but catastrophic creation of an undead infant. Graced with a starred review by Publishers Weekly that described it as a gritty, screenworthy supernatural noir set in 1980s New York, it was followed by Blood Pressure. 20 years later, a new menace endangers the humans and vampires that survived Book One. Terence will soon conclude his trilogy with Past Life, set in 2027 and featuring a Tuckerized me, as that rising horror threatens to end the world. And Jim, of course, wants me to mention that Terence is also our tech director emeritus, because when we were at Brooklyn Common, Terence helped get our video and audio set up together, and it was great. And of course, he's also one of my favorite brunch buddies, but that's only a benefit to me and him. So there you go. Anyway.
And the Hudson and the river on the west side that we look at each time we brunch.
Well, it was the East River last time.
It's the East River, actually. I
Yes, it
always get
was,
them.
because, I moved to
The
Brooklyn.
Hudson is on the west side. The East
the
River is the
Hudson's
East
on the
River.
west side,
Hence
except
the
that the
title
East River
River.
is on the west side of Brooklyn. So it's very confusing, and I'm confused all the time.
Yes.
And how is Shuri, our favorite spooky black cat?
She's fine. She's being scarce. I went out and did some writing at a cafe nearby, so she's probably sulking because I actually had the nerve to actually walk out of the house without her. So I sort of did a little treat rattle, seeing if I can lure her out for a cameo, but we'll see. She usually disappears when I start talking because she's always like a little. Oh.
Anyway, I guess you can do a lot of talking because Terrence is going to read, and I hope our audience enjoys it. And I see that actually Barbara is tuning in. So, hello, Barbara. And that is really nice. And if you have any questions for Terrence that occur to you during the reading, type them in to the chat on Facebook or YouTube, and we will do our best to answer them after Terrence reads. But
Now, Jim is giving a note saying my audio levels are hot, but I don't see a way I can turn myself down. Can he control that? He asks.
I do not know. He says no. I think we will just have to go
Is
with.
this better? I turned the volume down. Am I lower now, Jim?
Oh,
Well, I mean, am I burning out or? Okay.
I think we'll
Which
just.
do you prefer, the distortion of the artifacts or the volume of the headphones? Because I could take off the headphones and just go with the microphone that was you said had artifacts before.
Yeah, I would go with that microphone.
With what I've got now.
No,
the original microphone.
Okay,
Your,
hang
your,
on.
vo-
Hang
your
on.
volume is much better now, but without distortion is an improvement.
Okay, now I can't hear you at all, Terrence. So that's not an improvement. Please stand by, our audience, while I blather.
Okay, there we go.
Okay,
So, can I be heard now?
yes.
Okay, so Jim, I was confused by what you were saying. This is better than the headphones blasting.
Well, they've each got problems.
You know what? I think we should just go with this and not
Okay.
sacrifice the good in search of the perfect.
There we go.
Right, and let's not spend all that time.
As long as I can be heard without sounding like a Dalek.
You don't sound like a Dalek.
Okay, as long as it's articulate. I'll be
Barbara
reading for a while.
Barbara is suggesting you go with the headphones. Actually, I'm sorry, folks. While we sort out some technical.
This is the world we live in. Well,
yeah.
my feeling is Barbara is listening as the audience is listening, and if it sounds okay to her, then I'm thinking we're going to go with the headphones.
Yes. So thanks for everybody's patience. This is what happens when you get an audio expert producing the series, and our reader is also a film and audio expert as well. So we have a certain amount of desire for perfection, which, I can't fault, but I think the rest of you would just like to hear Terrence read his story. Terrence, do you want to introduce the collection that you where the story appears and what kind of story you'll be reading?
Sure. Can I be heard? Am I back?
Mm-hmm. Everybody's happy, and apparently there was a high-pitched whine which no one can hear now.
Okay, well, good. Oh, high-pitched whine. Ooh, that was an aspect. So, is this text the right direction, or
it is the right direction?
Oh, good, because I held up the book before and saw it was backwards, so I've turned off the mirroring. So the story I'm going to read is called The Catch, and it's from the John Joseph and Douglas Cohn collection called What the Blank, which was inspired by a graphic, but the idea was that each of the stories had to have at some point a character saying what the blank, whatever they wanted to put in for the blank. And so what's our policy on language? Can I use F-bombs and should I be cleaning up my language in the stories?
I think we're good to go.
In that case, I'm fucking ready. So, so at any rate, I love John because he evidently caught my first published story and made some reference to it on a podcast years ago. But afterwards we crossed paths, and I just finished doing like 5 years of a review column in Nightmare magazine with the just wonderful Wendy Wagner, who I learned so much. She just had such a wonderful light touch that just focused everything I did for 5 years. So it was sort of a master class in nonfiction writing because she always got what I was trying to say and just clarified how to say it a bit better. And by the end, there was hardly any editing she was doing. But I also ended up in some of the Lightspeed, the POC collections, which was a great fun as well. But this was a collection that they did that was completely separate from those. And what's always interesting is that you can be invited to an anthology you may not necessarily appear in. So I'm always very happy when I produce a story that actually is worthy of inclusion. And this one was very perverse. It was very fun to write. And John's given me several opportunities to do some things that evidently were things I always wanted to do without quite realizing it until I'd done them. So should I start reading the story and then we'll
Yes,
pick it up?
please.
Okay, so I will tell you nothing more about the story, but I will now go to it on Word and I will start reading it without being able to see anything that's going on. So if I have to see any words from either of you on the little, I wonder if I can somehow get that little text window up on the side. So if something, yes, there we go. So if something does come up, I can still see. There we go. That works beautifully. Okay, so this story is called The Catch, and it's sort of sci-fi horror. Let me see what I look like when I lean forward like this. Large. Well, I could live with that. So, the boyfriend was too easy. He had died slowly, painfully, protested all the way as they always did. Before I was done with him, the big, beefy, blonde beach boy had wept copious tears, hysterical, and begged as he offered sexual services he would never have considered under any other circumstances, none of which ever appealed to me. There had been nothing original that told me anything new. He'd been the same as every dumb jock I'd slit open in secret since college, long before I'd built my home surgery. All the butch boys bawled like babies, no matter how big a bully. This one hadn't looked like the brightest bulb in the box. When I had surreptitiously watched him and his girl at the restaurant as they fumbled their way through what looked like a first date, but not later as I followed them to their car with my twin tasers, duct tape and nylon cable ties. Even so, he'd been a disappointment. How many victims had there been? How many of these macho assholes had I silenced by now? There had been a time when I kept a careful list of every instrument used on every last one, details of the stalking, capture, and kill. I had film, videotaped, and digital files of all the sessions here in my hidden basement room, carefully organized on paper or hard drives, even an assortment of anonymous and untraceable souvenirs, all rigged to self-destruct in a variety of ways if handled by anyone but me. Meaningless. I'd grown past that. It wasn't about records or numbers anymore. I only cared about what each individual act told me. Killing wasn't so much an art or an obsession now as it was religion, a spiritual quest. Taking life from others as slowly and methodically as I can has become a search for something deep within myself. For the reason I do this, if nothing else. I know I'm a monster, but still don't understand why. I can't blame my parents. They were a saintly couple with no idea of how to handle their young son's frequent night terrors, as I woke screaming from dreams of steely surgical tables and sharp, thin blades, much less any knowledge of where that had led me as I grew to manhood. They were affluent academics, able to afford their own home near my mother's teaching position at New York University, with room for my father's studio. His paintings weren't the most daring of his day, but they'd been popular and sold successfully for long enough to afford them an upper-class bohemian lifestyle, idyllic, until I came along to cast a pall over their happiness. My poor, dear, innocent parents. No, what drove me to do what I did had to be in me alone, something solitary and unique, whatever the cause. Whatever that was, I hadn't found it yet. I turned my attention to the girl. She'd laid there quietly, facing in my direction, had watched silent as I meticulously vivisected her date throughout the long night. Making the girls watch was usually part of the fun, to let them anticipate what was to come next as I stripped flesh and muscle from their boyfriends. I'd studied anatomy over the years, like a medical student, from the same textbooks. mastered where to cut to avoid veins and arteries to minimize bleeding, rinsed away what blood and fluids were released as they rose from muscle tissue. It was a remarkably slow but clean process, one designed to maximize suffering while prolonging life, as the meat of the body's extremities was sliced into layers thinner and thinner, gradually pared to the bone. My methods had evolved over the years to what I considered to be their utmost effectiveness and become routine. The only variation I ever sought was in the infinitely individual responses of my subjects. The girls usually stared in rapt horror, shrieked as best they could through their bright red ball gags, whimpered long after they'd gone hoarse, knowing that when I was done with their date, it would be their turn. But not this one. She had watched me calmly, quiet, almost analytical, more like a curious colleague observing a surgery than my next victim. I walked around her partner's remains, neatly arranged on the long stainless steel autopsy table next to hers, stood between them without obscuring the girl's view. "Hello, pretty," I said softly. Stroked her cheek with the back of my rubber-gloved hand, still wet with the boy's blood. She didn't flinch, locked her eyes on mine, as if able to communicate with that cool gaze alone. Her eyes never blinked. They were dazzling deep green, almost emerald. I touched her auburn hair, such a perfect complement to the rest of her coloring, picked up a pair of sharp shears, and cut her date-night clothing from her body with a tailor's precision. I felt like I could almost hear her voice in my head, low, soothing, like a lover's whisper in my ear, encouraging me. Of course, that was just my imagination, the usual siren call of death and dismemberment, to continue until I was done, until my search was complete, until all hope I would find whatever it was I looked for was gone. Hope that only came again when a new couple posed the same eternal question anew in my mind and provided new bodies in which to search for the answer. When the girl was completely naked, I gathered the ruins of her wardrobe in my hands, a multicolored bouquet of fabric scraps, and stood at the foot of the table like a bridesmaid to see my handiwork. Her pale white skin was smooth as Michelangelo marble. Though my interests were more surgical than sexual, she had just the right amount of everything to satisfy me, fuller in figure than most men prefer today. Nearly too good to be true, too much what I look for when I go out trawling for prey. She was an almost exact replica of the first girl to trigger my more violent appetites, even no one could possibly know that but me. I thought so earlier when I spotted the couple at the mall. She was not a perfect woman by any means, but she was oddly perfect for me, almost like bait for the catch of the day. The thought made me shudder. My father had fished for sport and often took me with him as a treat. Fly fishers know how to use custom-tied lures to attract what they wanted. Why did this one feel like it had been designed to accommodate my particular tastes? Why did I suddenly feel the hook in my mouth, the tug on the line? I looked around the room against my will, felt foolish to fear I was being watched by unseen eyes. The only cameras here were mine. The girl still stared at me. Her eyes followed mine like those in a haunted mansion portrait, implacable as ever. Nary a blush crossed the surface of her exposed flesh. There was still no struggle against her bonds, the bright yellow nylon ropes that bound her securely to the steel table in a trident, arms bent up, tied at the wrists and elbows, at the waist, knees and ankles, legs together, one last double bond at the throat. I felt a hot flush of anger as she stared at me calmly. This one would be a challenge. I sat in front of my big flat-screen TV with dinner on a freestanding tray in front of me, looking forward to a night of CSI on my DVR. The girl and her date's bloodless body were secured downstairs in the basement, behind my hidden room's secret door. Their car was in the garage in front until I drove it to a predetermined spot in New Jersey. There, a fence I contact only by burner phone would pick it up and strip it down to parts for sale across the country. The garage left empty for my next guest's car. When my parents' Greenwich Village townhouse had been willed to me, I quickly decided to modify it to suit my own purposes, far darker than their famed Sunday brunches and Christmas parties. It had taken years after their completely natural deaths for me to finish my soundproof little slaughterhouse, equipped with spray hoses and drains to clean blood and other waste from my clinically correct workspace, acid baths and a crematorium for disposal of remains. It had taken patience, but that had only increased my anticipation of how perfectly the concealed chamber would suit my needs when done. My playroom had been perfected with discreet but regular use over the last decade. The best addition I'd made was installing wireless cameras to keep an eye on it. The girl's image was crystal clear on the retina screen of an iPad Air that sat next to me. I flipped through DVR choices displayed on my TV with the remote. There was a new CSI now set in New Orleans. My own experiences gave the lie to most of their cases, but I enjoyed outsmarting them on my living room. It was what I did instead of Sudoku or other puzzle games, a cheap way to stay sharp. I glanced at the iPad screen again. She was still firmly bound, the flayed male body on the table next to her dead, partially dismembered, left to keep her on edge, all fluids washed neatly down the drains of his stainless steel table. Except for that, I never cleaned up the remains until I was done. Preferred to work in a room that looked like the abattoir that it was. Usually, the girl was in shock by now, either staring at the corpse beside her in mute horror, or weeping silently, eyes squeezed shut against the sight. This one seemed to see the camera I used to observe her stare directly into the lens, as if into my own eyes. I clicked the control on the screen to select another view. A scant second after the image on my screen changed, so did her gaze, as it moved to the new camera to meet mine. I repeated the experiment, went through all 5 cameras I had hidden in the room, and each time her eyes moved with mine. I had covered all the lights on the cameras. The lenses were concealed. There was no way she could know where they were, which was active, and yet she seemed to. I was tempted to go down and try to figure out how, but resisted. Certain the explanation was not in my equipment. I finished dinner, washed the dishes, then dried and put them away as I thought all the while about the mystery downstairs. Could she be telepathic enough to know what I'm doing? I'd read of stranger things. There are enough ESP studies on record to indicate the possibility. I smiled. If she could get into my head, she'd find no solace there. As I dried my hands and rubbed them with moisturizing lotion, I considered going downstairs to continue, but I usually waited 24 hours. No need to vary my routine on her account. That would only give back some of the power I'd gained since abducting her. Couldn't have that now. I changed into soft fleece pajamas and retired, iPad propped to my bedside table, the gentle glow of the girl's pallid skin as my nightlight. I hesitated before I closed my eyes, knew that she only looked at the camera, not into my room, but still felt an odd tingle of observation, as if I really was the one being watched. So I'm going to condense this a bit. He has a job at the library at NYU. There's a description of that space, which had actually been the site of several suicides. And he goes through a description of that. He goes to the men's room and looks and sees his victim basically up and out of her bonds, examining the body next to her, and freaks out, races home to see what's going on. When he gets home, the basement room was exactly the same as I left it, but now looked new to me. I entered with high-powered taser in a hand, saw it all as if for the first time, searching for any trace of anything out of place, some trap laid, some sign of danger. The girl was back in place, naked as ever, green eyes wide. I was suddenly afraid for the first time since I was a child when I woke screaming from bad dreams very much like this. There was some small excitement at feeling fear instead of inducing it for a change. Was this what I'd liked lately, the thrill of the hunt? Had I become so proficient that I'd lost any real enjoyment in my work, going through the motions like a bored civil servant on the job too long to care? If so, what I'd seen on the screen had destroyed all sense of complacency. The girl's eyes followed me as I crossed to her side and checked the ropes. How did you do that, eh? I asked, my little Houdini. I yanked at her freckled arms, still solidly in place. I wheeled my surgical tools into place beside her. No reason to waste time. Do what the Inquisition did with the inexplicable. Destroy it. I lifted a slender knife with a short, thin blade. Her eyes didn't leave me as I raised it over her forearm and slid the razor's sharp tip along the surface of the skin, slipped it beneath. She didn't even flinch. I ended the long cut, returned to its top with another shorter blade to slide under the skin and separate it from the muscle. The edge seemed to move too easily, as if there was no real resistance. I was just severing a few tendons or hitting gristle, but her flesh parted from the meat of the arm like skin on a pudding. There was no blood, just glistening amber tissue underneath that looked like fat, only tougher. I frowned, tried to pull more skin away without success, then used the knife to worry it free to reveal more. The elastic substance I'd seen where muscle should be surrounded what looked like a more traditional skeletal structure, though made of something that wasn't bone. There were dark lines beneath the surface of the tissue, not red or blue, but golden browns, dully pulsing. What the fuck is that? I breathed. What the fuck are you? Whatever it was shouldn't exist inside someone who had been walking and talking earlier. Whatever this was shouldn't look so convincingly human on the surface when what was underneath was so completely not. I held the scalpel still in my hand. Why hadn't the thing stopped me? I looked back into her eyes. She looked significantly down to the ball gag in her mouth. I almost dropped the scalpel as I rushed to take it off, but kept my blade ready in case she slipped her bonds again. Don't stop, Neil McConnell, the girl, if I can still call her that, said. You want to see what I am, how I work. Feel free. It doesn't hurt? I examined my incision, peeled back more skin. I admit that makes it less interesting. This body needs to feel, but pain to warrant a damage is unnecessary as this unit repairs itself. What are you? I asked. A remote biological drone. What your stories of UFO abduction called grays were more primitive models, developed before we gained interest in your world. They looked good enough back then. Alien drones? That explained what I was cutting up. Any ordinary man would have been paralyzed with shock at this new development, but not me. There were some advantages, my difference from others, my lack of empathy, or most any other human emotions. I picked up a new tool, sliced it a little deeper, watched the way the thick tissue seemed to flow back together after I removed the blade. Was it self-healing? If I closed the wound, would it automatically seal itself? Good enough for what? Research and development. Of what? I pulled up my stool and sat, slid open the girl's abdomen, and found interesting organs of a number and kind I'd never seen before. It was all quite incredible. She talked on, oblivious to my investigation of her body. You're the culmination of a decades-long series of experiments to develop a prototype, one that can do what you do for us without getting caught or cracking up. The girl retained the casual conversational tone I'd eavesdropped on earlier in the evening when sizing up the couples. Sounded like a more seductive Siri, bemused with a trace of first date coyness. It was strange to hear her speaking with a full personality while acting as a smartphone for extraterrestrial invasions. I called it an invasion, even if they hadn't. They were here and busy killing us. Had been for years. That seemed to qualify. Cracking up? Some of our more productive models can't sustain their sanity in light of their duties. They break down, go out of control, and are arrested or killed. You've resolved your inner conflicts the best. You survived. You thrived. You killed for us and no one knew. I frowned. Why? There was a pause and her eyes glazed, as if I was on a hold while side conversation was held. Her gaze snapped back into focus as she spoke again, which confirmed my suspicions. We need stimulation, Neil McConnell. You stimulate us. Me? Your race. Its pain, collected in your brain. She rolled her head to look at the other body. Your species was deemed too primitive for contact for most civilized worlds. But some of us look deeper. Certain impulses your altered brain produces when you inflict suffering can be collected and fed into ours. It's too conflict for your limited mind to understand. But the byproduct of human pain and terror that your brain creates for us affects our systems differently. Some of us enjoy the sensation. Like a drug? I worked with college students in a building on Washington Square Park. I knew how to handle pushers and junkies. Much more than that. Her face softened with pleasure. You're just addicts and I'm your connection? She shrugged. So you make me kill. I gestured at the body beside us. Made me for this? We made many to do this. You're simply the best. You implanted me in my mother? No. Only modify your developing fetus during a vacation trip to Florida. Neither parent remembered what happened on the highway, where they went, or what was done to them. She smiled. Neither did you as you grew up. None of it. With those words, images poured through my head from childhood. Not nightmares of steel tables and surgery after all, but real memories of alien infant abduction, off-world office visits to my pediatrician for fine-tuning of my little psycho brain night after night as they turned me into their killing machine. I felt the closest I've ever felt as an adult to an emotional reaction, other than pleasure in my work. No, not my work, their work, I thought, and felt it again. It was not an emotion I could define, not having had many in my life, but it was not one of the good ones. We cannot read your thoughts, only collect what your brain produces when you torture and kill. We felt a loss of enthusiasm that lessened our enjoyment. That's why we needed to do this. I worried open what passed for a rib cage, careful not to sever any organs that might be used to make it talk. Go on. I mulled over what I was experiencing. You're dissatisfied. You want more. So do we. What do you suggest? Her eyes lit up. Kill the earth. I can't even imagine what she saw on my face. Hear me out. No more one-on-one. Move on to mass extermination. You tell us how, and we give you the means. The terror of a planetary extinction will produce in you the worldwide equivalent of what you induce here. You collect it for us. We store our supply. It won't be as much as you could have provided over time. It'll be less refined, less potent, but good enough. She smiled, sunny bright. Does that renew your enthusiasm? To see your entire race die screaming any way you choose? It's not essential, but it would improve collection. Give us a better buzz, as you say. I thought of Kathy, my boss, all the students and staff at NYU, my neighbors, and everyone else I'd ever met, dead, as heartily as I pleased with the rest of the human race. For a better buzz? I'm a killer, no doubt of that. A serial killer many times over. Am I capable of being history's last and greatest mass murderer? Is that all I am? No, this can't be real, I faltered. There was that odd feeling again. Had I finally slipped over the edge into complete psychosis? Was I hallucinating? I looked down at my hands, wrist deep inside the drone's abdomen, and knew I wasn't. What's in it for me? I asked suddenly, not sure why. A world to kill, Neil MacDonald. No limits, no restrictions, no consequences. What's the catch? The catch? The girl looked quizzical as if she didn't understand something on the menu. You're offering a lot. What's the downside? To total domination over the human race? It sounds awfully administrative. You're talking planetary extinction. That means heavy equipment, staff, paperwork, human resources. I shook my head, realized I was stalling for time as I tried to process what I felt. And what do I do when I'm done? What's my retirement plan after wiping out mankind? Oh, I don't know. Keep a few for your... Wait. The girl's operators went into consultation again as her eyes went blank. She raised her head again, looked even more puzzled. What do you suggest? I sat back on my stool, selected another blade, one with serrated edges. Well, the real issue here is the buzz, right? You're not getting as good from me as you want. Maybe the problem is your source material. Yes. She looked cutely peeved. Your point? Well, can't you harvest the impulses of your own kind through me? Can't you experience this kind of fear or pain? I toyed with a new tool. There was a long silence before she answered. What's the purpose of the question? Well, I was thinking if I tortured one of you to death, it'd be much more interesting to me than killing more humans. More exciting. The high could be incredible. I twiddled with some long, stringy things that the new tool had uncovered. For us both. The girl twitched. I wasn't sure if it was because of something I'd done inside her or the idea. Her face looked thoughtful. A slight crown creased her tanned brow. That's impossible. Our environment would kill you. There's no protection that makes you a suitable killer. You'd be too vulnerable. We are many times stronger than humans. Yes, but you can put your consciousness into a perfect human simulacrum. You can't put mine into one like you? I could see the storm at the other end of the line play out on the girl's face. She was appalled, angry, excited, aroused, angry, but greedy for a better buzz. There was the longest wait yet, then a slow response. That is not technically impossible. Excellent. You could elicit from one of us what you get from one of these, asked the girl. Oh, so much more. I'd be better motivated. I didn't explain why. You'd feel the horror of your own kind, the suffering of greater minds than ours, far more intense than those of mere humans, even as you experience my pleasure in doing it. My people make entertainment of the things I do to them in TV and movies. There are few surprises for my victims, save that it's being done to them. They bore me. You'd be fresh material, unexplored, a blank page I fill with blood. You've all been so safe for so long, so superior. Your terror, oh, would be exquisite. Your suffering sublime. The high would surpass any and all possibilities left for me here. I stared down into their biological doll's eyes with a salesman's smile, and dangled an abstract internal organ I just removed from its thorax before the thing's wide eyes. I will make meat of you. Then I paused and waited. There could be a way. Her face looked as pleased as it had when the boy let her order lobster at the restaurant. Your idea has merit, but we can't let you hunt freely on our world as you do on yours. Oh, no, of course not. But surely those are those who are undesirable for whatever reason, criminals, deviants, those who have struck the greater good. I could pick them off for years before anyone even notices they're gone. Pause. There are always those in any society. Well then, just point me to them. If you guys like pot, you're going to love peyote. I didn't oversell it, but then you never have to sell a better high to a junkie. Transportation will be arranged, she said quickly. A host body of our species will be grown, and we'll provide lessons so you can function in it in our culture. Her eyes glittered brightly as she smiled broadly. This is a very interesting new venture, Neil McConnell. We will be in contact. The eyes went blank. Its head rolled to the side. The breath and heartbeat stopped as soon as the drone disconnected. I sighed and started the process of cleaning up my playroom. It looked like I wouldn't be seeing it for a while, if ever. Space. Who would have thought? How many murders had it taken for me to find the real reason I did it? I chuckled at the irony as I cut up what was left of the drone and her dead date, dropped the parts into acid, burned what was left in the crematorium. The answer wasn't what I had expected, nor was my final fate. I'd assumed I'd die in jail or an asylum. Instead, after years of whittling it down, I had just saved the human race by being the best guy for the job of killing it, then coming up with a better idea. Too bad for my employers that they didn't know there was a catch. I had finally recognized the feeling they'd drawn out of me when they answered the one question that had plagued me all of my life. Why was I a monster? The feeling was rage. Rage over my lost life, for all I might have been without their interference, for all that my tortured victims might have been without mine. They'd taken my life, made me a killer, and then wanted me to murder my world for their weekend fix. I could have lashed out, but thanks to the years of rational thinking and disciplines that the aliens had instilled in me, I channeled my rage into salvation for the human race, and some small measure of revenge, enough for now. It would grow until I'd found my makers and fulfilled my promise to make meat of them all. My parents could finally be proud of me. I wasn't sure if saving humanity redeemed me for all I'd done, or if it was even a good idea. I just knew that I had an adventure ahead unlike any I ever imagined. I looked forward to my new career of murdering those who made me what I am with renewed enthusiasm. My heart was back in my work. Neil McConnell, Savior of Earth. I can't wait to build my new playroom. The end.
Oh my God, that's demented, Terrence. It's
What can
delightful.
I say? One of the things that I learned, particularly in writing the first novel, the rewrite of the first novel, that was basically the book that got published, was how to access that dark side and to make it productive. And the fact that I could come up with this concept of a story where a serial killer is the main character and the hero, and that essentially by the end he saved Earth by offering to murder everybody else, just delighted me no end. And it gave me a nice cathartic ending. I mean, it was like he gets everything he wanted, he understands himself completely, and he's got a new purpose, which is just to wipe out these aliens until he gets to the ones who did this to him. So yeah, it was fun. I was thrilled that it got accepted, even more so that I got to inflict it on the reading public. But what can I say?
I can't help but notice that you gave him Rick Bose's job.
Absolutely. And actually, not only did I give him Rick Bose's job, I had to call up Rick and get research information from him about the section I didn't read had a lot of more details about the library. And it basically had him explain to me what it was he did, how it worked, where he was, and all of that. So I had some wonderfully accurate description. The reason that I was inspired to do that was the idea that there had been these suicides in the library. People kept leaping off of the atrium, and there have been about 3, I think, before they finally put up dividers that kept that from being possible. But it just sort of, it created the right setting for where the story went. And even though that was a little bit background, that informed the feeling of it for me, that you had this guy who basically had sat there at his desk watching bodies, that's in the description, drop by him several times in his time there. And that just was sort of like kind of a secret thrill because he was a murdering monster. So, but yes, Rick is definitely the guardian angel of this story.
Yeah, just for context, everybody, we're referring to Richard Bose, a writer who, in fact, has been on read for Nurse many, many times, and also appeared on Hour the Wolf many, many times. I know that Jim usually plays his 9/11 short story. What's it called? There's a Hole in the World.
Yeah.
Every year to commemorate
9/11.
9/11. But it was a hole in the city. Right. Yes,
That's
thank
right.
you,
Right.
Jim. So yeah, it's just funny. What did he think when he
was
read what you used to put it?
He was highly amused. I'm pretty sure the story went by the writing group because that was part of the reason I knew Rick well enough to ask him questions. And when I explained to him why I was asking, and he thought that was hilarious, that I was basically turning him into a serial killer because there were other aspects of the character that sort of reminded me of Rick as well. But yeah, I love this story. It's such a twisted little sick thing. And the idea that there were all these failed serial killers they created that were getting shot by the cops or locked up in asylums, and that this was the most effective experiment they'd done. And yeah. What?
It reminds me a little bit of that Torchwood miniseries where the kids are drugs, but like I think this feels a lot more cohesive to me. Actually,
well, I was
much
say,
meaner.
I don't think I'd seen that before I'd written this. So when I saw that, it was like such a dark. Torchwood is so dark that I love it. But
this
God,
is much
it's
more
depressing.
Cathartic than
because that was just like, oh my God! By the time I got to the end, I don't even remember the ending. But all I remember is that the first season of Torchwood, by the end of the season, they'd murdered everybody but the one who'd come on at the beginning, and it was like, what the hell? And Jack, and it was just like, oh my God! I had the flu once, and I spent like a week on the couch sick, watching every Doctor Who I could find online, all the old ones. And when I ran out of Doctor Who's old and new to watch, I decided I'd watch Torchwood. The thing with Doctor Who is no matter how dark it gets, it's always going to be a happy ending. The Doctor is always going to save the day. You always know there's a guaranteed catharsis. Oh my God, I started watching Torchwood, and after like 5 episodes, it was like, this was not the right decision to make. This is not taking me out of the dark. This is just driving me deeper into feeling sick and horrified. So,
well, that lets us to a wonderful segue. Speaking of dark things and dark places which appear, I don't know, happy. Let's talk about your most recent story that's in Out There Screaming, the Black Horror anthology edited by Jordan Peele, and of course John Joseph Adams, who I also owe a professional debt to because he was helpful in my audiobook career. But let's talk about that story a little bit.
John's wonderfully nurturing. I mean, there's so many people I know who he's just touched their lives in very appealing ways. The column was life-changing. I mean, I had talked them down. But yes, no, I got this invitation from him saying, well, there's going to be this anthology, and it's basically going to be a collection of Black writers. We can't tell you who's doing it, and you're going to have to sign an NDA before you submit anything. But interested? And I was like, sure, yeah. And once I signed the NDA, found out what it was, and it was like, oh God, this is going to be really, really good. I've got to really, really do this right. And there had been a story I'd written that was almost a novella. It was basically about a dark future America that was basically lynching black people on reality shows on TV like Survivor for entertainment because America's economy had gotten so bad. And I remember it's very funny being told I brought it into the writing group, and what's very funny is that oh God, why am I completely blocking his name right now? But one of the members of the group, the other black writer in the group who's in the anthology, Justin Key, had said, "Oh, this is so dark, and I don't know. I mean, Obama's president. We're post-racial. I don't think this could happen." And boy, by the time Obama was out, within the first year of Trump, I was like ready to call up and go, "Post-racial, huh? Not possible, huh? We've gotten so close to what this story is in the next 4 years. It was almost terrifying." And at some point, I had to go back and rewrite it, but it was impossible to bring it down to the 5,000 words that they wanted for the story submitted. So I came up with something new. But both this story and I have to do a quick plug for the Canterbury Nightmares, which is an anthology by David Neal Wilson, which has another very long and very sick story in it by me. But the two stories, when I was working on both of them that year, because this is like COVID writing, I was there were several short stories I'd written that stood out. The first one published, Plaything, was one. Wet Pain, which has been reprinted 3 times, the third time in this lovely little box collection by Patton Oswalt, who basically would create these collections of short stories. He'd have like a little editor comment here, but then each story was in the box separate as an individually bound sort of pamphlet. And so it ended up getting accepted to the 3rd anthology. He had gotten the story because Tananarive had a story that was going to go into the 2nd collection. There were some issues, so there was a possibility he might not be able to use it. So she sent him this story, which she'd actually been teaching at her class in California. And they loved it, but they clear up the rights issues with her story. She went in the 2nd collection. I ended up in the 3rd, and unfortunately the last, because it's a great concept. And each time it got, and she'd also reprinted it in the POC Destroy Horror anthology as a reprint story. But each time it got reprinted, I got to go back in and do a little bit of work on it. So each time it got a little bit better. And this 3rd copy is like, it's the ultimate version of this long, long story. But it was about things that meant something to me very deeply, as was the first story. And I realized that what made them different from the other stories, which were fun and good horror stories, but what I really needed was to be able to go to a place that I felt passionate about. So this story I just read, I enjoyed. It was great fun, but it wasn't around an issue particularly that meant something more than the joy of the writing of the story. So what the Canterbury Nightmares collection was supposed to be was stories about people getting together. It was like Canterbury Tales. A group of travelers meet in a motel near the Grand Canyon. They've all come there after the first year of lockdown. They each tell a story about their experience. And mine ended up going someplace. It became an homage to Saki's Gabriel Ernest. And I basically unleash a digital incubus, because it's a male demon, sex demon, on a sex site online that begins to plague this guy because he actually conjures it up with sex magic he hadn't used since high school. I mean, right away, it's like, what the what now? But it was wonderful to write. It was great fun. And being able to play with reviving this character from the story that I love in a new form was very fun as well. But a lot of the story was around the issues around what the internet's become, the whole weird way people had of contacting each other during lockdown, the intimacy levels, where sex goes in the internet age. So that was a very, and I had been collecting a lot of thoughts around that for years because there was so much that kept coming up, but it was always just below the surface. It was never really hitting. So there was a half-hour series on Vice where this young woman had done some episodes about it, but there were all these bits and pieces that had kept rolling around in my head, and this story gave me a place to put them all. So for the Peel anthology, at some point a year or two ago, before I'd started writing the story, the 13th came out, which was Ava DuVernay's documentary about prison and the prison system, and essentially about the 13th Amendment. So the 13th Amendment, I always find it very funny how there's certain weird things like that Black History Month was ironically the shortest month of the year. I mean, there are all these grudging things that they gave us over the years, and one of them at the 13th Amendment was this ends slavery. Now, initially, when Lincoln, we discovered in the 1619 Project, when Lincoln was originally ending slavery, it was only for the South. It was to destroy their workforce and screw them out of being able to win the war by any stretch of the imagination. And then it ended up getting extended a few years later to the entire nation. But the wording of the 13th Amendment is very specific. And it says that there's no slavery in the U.S. unless you've been convicted of a crime. And that answered the question I had for years, which is why did we always make jokes about prisoners making license plates or other things? It's because it's free labor. Most of the labor in the prison, they do the cleaning, the cooking, everything else, because that saves the system money. The privatized prison system has only taken more advantage of this. And there was a big scandal in the 90s because suddenly people found out that Victoria's Secret and all these major sports brands were being made by people in prison who were getting paid like 35 cents an hour, if that. And the concept, as the incarceration of people of color just ramped, we have the largest prison population of any, I think, I don't know if it's any individual country in the world or we have more prisoners than the entire world combined, but a large number of them are people of color who are basically enslaved again. So we've got this great little system of slavery that we use to do all this work, and I wanted to play with that concept. So that's what the story became about. And I'm not going to say anything more about it than that. But
No,
it
you would
begins.
ruin it.
No, I guess it's. But the things I can say about it is writing that story became a fascinating thing. One of the things that I wanted. Okay, both of these stories gave me the opportunity to do something I'd never quite done before, which was to let myself take the brakes off. Now, I'd taken the brakes off when I wrote Bite Marks, but there were still some limits. And my limit was always that I wanted every story to have a happy ending to a certain degree, that I wanted these things to be cathartic. And I had a big debate with Stephen Barnes when I was working on the shoot for their short film about that, because Stephen was like, no, scare them, doesn't matter. Like, everybody can die. And I was like, no, there has to be some redemption at the end. For the first time, looking at the story I was writing for the Peel collection, I didn't see an out. And it was like, I don't know how to write this story unless I give myself permission to just let it go where it goes and not try to force it in a direction. So I did that with both stories, and they both went places that were like, holy crap. But the funniest thing is that when I started working on the Your Happy Place, once I made that decision, the next day when I got up, there was this malicious glee in the idea that I had just given myself free license to torment the reader as much as I wanted to drag them into the darkest pit of my unconscious, and to leave them there if I wanted to. In the end, I did find a catharsis in the story, though it's very dark, but it was like, the exercise of writing it was amazingly liberating, and it let me get into a place that I never allowed myself to go before. So I'm grateful to both Jordan Peele and to John Joseph Adams for giving me the platform that allowed that to be possible, and grateful that I was willing to take the risk and to do it. And the happiest day of my life was when I got the email from John going, I'm so pleased to say we're accepting your fantastic story. He called it a fantastic story, which, right, that was it. I mean, they could have not paid me at that point. To have that story described as fantastic just thrilled me no end. And it still delights me. Yeah.
It's not happy in a sort of obvious or facile way, but I think you can kind of
It's
squeeze a
satisfying.
certain kernel of like savage cathartic glee with
Yeah.
the perspective it takes. I mean, and
Yeah.
I think that I mean, and I'm not going to give anything away, but
Please don't.
there's
Yes.
a way you could have ended it, which could have been like, it would have made sense and have been desperately sad, but you kind of went in a more subtle direction that added a more like savage and complicated layer to how the characters were interacting and why they did what they did.
Yeah. And that's what made
I
it
don't
work
want
for
to,
me.
I always do this when I read something which other
Yeah.
people haven't read, and
Yeah.
it's not fair of me.
And that doesn't like that doesn't give anybody anything more than they would need to know. But yes, I mean, thank you for that. And I've gotten that response from a few people who have read it, because it was on one level there's a trope in play, but at the same time I'm warping it as much as I can. And I of course was stupid enough to look at Amazon comments. So there was some teacher or some English teacher who has a podcast who did a review, and he made a comment about the story. Oh, and it ends, I could see the ending coming, but, and then as soon as he says, I could see the ending coming a mile away, but he does some interesting things that really make it, and it's like, yeah, dude, it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. I knew that was, yes, that structure had that built into it, but I also knew that getting us to that place that it was inevitable that it would end could take us someplace even darker on the way. So I was like, don't read reviews, stop reading reviews, never read reviews, because you never remember the good ones. You only remember the ones that are like, stupid, annoying little things that just stick in your head and make you feel like crap.
Well, I sent you a link to mine, so
Yes, no, yours I thought was very perceptive, and I loved it. And that the anthology is amazing. I have to plug the anthology. I still haven't gotten through the whole thing. I haven't had time to read everything, but everything I've read, is like amazing. The other thing I want to say before we run out of time, because we're getting to that point, is when we were talking earlier, the first story I had published was in Brandon Massey's Dark Dreams anthology. And that was an amazing experience as well. It was the first thing I had published. It was a story I loved till to this day. There's a sequel to it that I'm working on. I've got to go back and rewrite. And then I got stories into the next two collections. The third collection was the Wet Pain story. But I feel like, but that was almost 20 years ago. That was like my 50th birthday. Yeah, I mean, oh, Jesus. That is almost 20 years ago. Okay, I'm not going to think about my age right now, but but the thing is that it was a new idea for horror. It had been done beautifully in science fiction by Shuri with the Dark Matters anthologies that she did, and that had opened the door to collecting a group of writers that I never had growing up. I grew up reading Ray Bradbury and Heinlein, everybody that everybody else read, and they were invaluable. I mean, my three biggest influences were John Collier, Roald Dahl, and Saki, and that weird twist that they always had to their work informed everything I did. And the novel The Master of Margarita, which literally imprinted on as a 10-year-old when I read the book as a kid from my mother's collection, and that totally is what I did with Bite Marks, was the same thing he was trying to do. But what I really got to, and I've lost the train of thought that I was trying to go, was that this collection, the new one, to me is the culmination of what Brandon started 20 years ago. This is now, in the time since that, I watched and became a part of a community of writers that was growing and rising in visibility over the last 20 years. And I now feel like, oh my God, this is a new renaissance. This is like the Harlem Renaissance. It's a collection of writers and writing that's new, it's innovative, it's fascinating, and it's breaking down doors for everybody. Because it's not just Black writers now, it's gay writers, it's women writers, it's everybody who has a voice is getting the freedom to express it right now. And watching that, being a part of that is as thrilling to me as watching us go from 16 millimeter film and 2-inch video to the nonlinear digital video age that has me editing a documentary over the next 4 months on a friend of mine that I've been working on for 20 years and just gathering material. I'm just going to immerse myself in that. But this has that same feeling to me of like, it's a landmark moment. We started with the Dark Dreams collections. We have gotten here, and this is the establishing that we're there now. We've hit our stride. That's what I'm trying to say.
No, and
This
it's
is
a
just an
wonderful
amazing
it's a
collection to me.
wonderful anthology. I've actually gotten all
Beautiful.
the way through it, of course, and if anybody, gets it, I advise the audio version because they actually splashed out
Ooh.
for a separate narrator for every story,
Ooh.
which
Oh
is
my
something
God.
they almost never do. They sometimes do multiple narrators for anthologies, but it's usually like 3 people who swap off. You almost never get a fresh
Wow.
person for every story, which is very tailored.
That's
Um,
amazing. I have
yeah,
to hear how they did mine. I'm very
I
curious.
really liked it, and
Yeah,
there's, like, some
yeah.
other great stories. I think one of my favorite ones is this invasion story with impregnating women with alien babies,
Oh God.
which is just, fascinating on a, like, a colonizing
There were, oh
level. It's a
my God, yeah.
fascinating metaphor, but also just, like, the idea of invading by, like,
By infiltrating.
babies is
Yeah,
just like no
yeah.
one never I mean,
You're
okay,
going
there's
to
the
give
whole
back
midwich
to us.
cuckoos, but it, like, takes it to, like, a whole
Yeah,
other
yeah.
other level. But anyway, just as we have a second, I think we do have some people in the audience. I don't know if anybody has any questions for
Before we
Terrence.
we vanish out.
Yeah, and while we're waiting for someone to ask a question, can you talk a little bit about book 3 of your trilogy,
Ah,
other than
well,
me being in it?
yes. Well, and you'll enjoy the character. She goes from the 40s to modern day, and I won't say how. But yes, no, being wildly ADHD and low end spectrum, I have issues with time management. And for years, I would try and juggle 4 or 5 projects at the same time. And if each one takes a year, it would take me 5 years and then they'd all be done, but it would be 5 years of nothing happening. And I finally learned to do them one at a time in order or in an order. So I'm in the middle of working on a sci-fi mid-grade novel with a friend of mine in California that I'm almost done with the rewrite of, and which my agent read the first early draft of it. We've changed it radically because I did what I did with bite marks. The first draft she saw, she was like, "I get it, I love it. I can't submit it anywhere the way it is." I spent a year rewriting it and found my voice as a writer. But this is the same way. We've done this amazing rewrite, and that's going to be done in the next month, so I can go to edit this documentary about Fred Wilson that I want to do. I've got all his. He's a friend of mine for like since the 70s. I've followed his work all that time. He's been in a lot of videos. None of them dig anything past the
And his
surface.
sculpture was presented in
Was
front of Borough Hall for
the
months.
park.
It's not there now.
Yeah, I got footage of the break. I sat next to her while they were breaking it down and doing a dance performance around the breakdown, which was hilarious. It was great fun. But yeah, I mean, and I watch Fred's work evolve, and the perception is very surface. And I wanted to do a sort of nonlinear conceptual documentary about his work. So that's what I'm doing the next month. But after that, the vampire novel, I have first draft. I've got over 300 pages. I now have everything in the right order, and I put it together in Scrivener and output a document that I can go through and rewrite. But I've got to do a top to bottom rewrite to clean it up. But there's so much sick, twisted stuff in it. And it's set in 2027. And what was at the point that I was coming up with the idea 10 years ago was going to be a super dark dystopian future, which we were frighteningly close to 10 years later. So it's harder and harder for me to write something darker than where we are in the world at this point. But I'm going to knock it down 10 more years. But I love where it's going. I get to bring back Zernalda Hurston, who is a character in the second novel, and I had the idea of having her reunite with her vampire lover Turner, who parts from her at the end of the second book. I wanted to have them come back together in 1941 in LA because Zernalda Hurston worked for Paramount for a year, doing development mostly, and it was just before the U.S. went into the war. Her contract actually started on Halloween in 1941, and by December we were in World War II because of Pearl Harbor. But I had wanted to do a sort of weird sort of thing where basically, I see a question I'll have to answer quickly, where basically I had the Klan fighting joining with the Ku Klux Klan and the Nazis, joining up to try and take over America, and then found out that had actually been happening in LA in the 40s, and there was this whole enclave up PCH1 that they've just ripped out, but it was a fascinating thing. But yeah, it's. I won't say any more about it, but it closes things off very perversely and very nicely. Now I see a question here from
Yes, the
Chris
question
Colleen.
is whether you'd seen the show Resident Alien with Alan Tudyk.
I have not watched it yet, but I love Alan Tudyk, so it's on my list because he's great. I've been watching him on the first season of Doom Patrol. He was hilarious. He's been doing the voice for the Joker in the Harley Quinn animated series. So I've sort of followed him through various things he does. So I finally stumbled across that and I saw it, but he's brilliant. I've
I've
never
been
not
meaning to
watched him
watch
in
it
anything.
myself. I mean, my understanding is he's
It's
basically
definitely on my
essentially a
list.
gray who is disguised as a human, and he's on Earth to facilitate an invasion. And he ends up like posing as like the local doctor in a remote town, and they actually like he has to pretend to care because he's a doctor and he's not good at it, and it's
Oh,
about him
God.
sort of trying to sort of figure out, you know, like his disguise is so bad emotionally, and it's about him kind of like fixing it. And then, of course, as you would expect, he gets more sympathetic to humanity, which is very bad for an invasion.
This is
So
it's so hard to infiltrate America with terrorists because after they spend a few months here, it's like they're in strip clubs and you know fast food. They're like pro-America. They freaking love it. Well, it's funny. Fitzcarrald just said it's like he's autistic. I being low end spectrum, the weirdest thing in my life has been watching article after article coming out for the last 40 years explaining why I am the way I am. And because when I was a kid, I was just difficult. To teachers, I was just that difficult kid. And I have report cards from my first to fourth grade, which basically started with Terence is very bright. He gets his work done really well and quickly, but then he walks around the classroom and talks to everybody else and keeps them from getting anything done. And the second one is like, we've really got to work on this. We got to get this better. And the third one is like, oh my God, he's finally adjusting. He's finally acting like a normal human being. And then the fourth year, we were about to go back to the United States from the 4 years in France. And the teacher was like, oh my God, it's like we never tried anything. He's right back to where he started. I don't understand how this can happen. Good luck in America was the last line of the card. And it's like, not my problem anymore. And yeah, what can I say? A lot of people on the spectrum end up in production because, and ADHD, because what I call it rotational thinking. We jump and jump and jump, but we always get back to where we started. So there's a loop. And in production, that's invaluable. Because if you ever shoot, you're going through everything you need to do for the shoot in your head, and it's bouncing, bouncing, bouncing. And now that we're digital, if I come up with an idea of something I forgot at 2 a.m, I shoot an email up to somebody. You know, it's digital has made me a functional human being. And my feeling is that all of us on the spectrum were just evolved a little bit sooner than the rest of you. And we are nonlinear. We are digital. I have friends my age who are like just stare at their computers like it just came into their house and is trying to kill them. And they're constantly calling me up. I've been the tech support for the Black arts community for the last 40 years since I got my first Mac. And Fred, I finally got a piece of art out of him because I gave him so much help at his computer. He actually gave me a piece of art one day. But it's like, oh, I shouldn't have said that because he also said, don't tell my gallery you have this. But there's just, now that I understand why my brain does what it does, I know that the calendar is essential. I do not remember to do things if I don't write them in my calendar. And I can have my calendar remind me 20 minutes, an hour, whenever that this thing is coming up. I'm able to like function in a way that I never could before. And thank God for digital. It's like, I mean, I'm low end spectrum disorder, but definitely, I mean, I have the fact that I haven't shut up for the last 5 minutes is part of it.
But at the same time, you're a tomorrow person, is what you're saying to me.
I am, and I feel like, you know, they're catching up to us. We are just a little bit ahead of the curve, and the whole concept of people having these, what's the word they use? The gifts, there's a term for it, but that some kid can listen to anything and play it on the piano. These little weird things. Mine is digital and writing. It's storytelling, and it's digital. And I've been able to understand everything. When I'm editing, I don't even think about what my hands are doing anymore. I'm just in the film, and I'm manipulating the video and the sound and the image without having to look at the manual anymore. And to get to that state is just wonderful, because it's just a flow. I get into the flow state and I just bam, do it, But yeah, it's a wonderful age for people whose brains function like mine, because we finally have the age that those brains work in. So I'm thrilled. But
good.
yes, I see the word cyborg on screen. Now that I have 2 artificial hips, I'm officially cyborged out. I have mechanical robot parts in me that I still have an 18-year-old clone body. I'm like, how have I gotten this old? I want my clone body. I want another 100 years.
You're waiting for the digital singularity and the download into robot bodies.
Look, that whole downloading thing is like, is it me or is it a duplicate of my brain just as software?
No, it would be. But in any case, before we do have one question from John Gladstone Gelman, who asks, do you have any memories of the Elgin cinema that you'd like to share?
Okay, that is a phrase that no one under the age of 40 probably even knows. So I can almost tell John's age from the question. The Elgin cinema, okay, you can find any movie you want online somewhere now. And I have. I've gone back, because I realized when I went to college in 73, I went to St. John's. I went to freshman year as an art major. Then I went to St. John's, became a communications major. Had never seen a lot of movies as a kid, had seen 2001, 1 or 2 others, but I suddenly was in a film class, Survey of the Foreign Cinema, and it just told me something I'd never known, because I could always draw some, I could write some, and I couldn't figure out what to do with these 2 partial skills, and cinema was the answer. So I started scheduling all my classes in the morning. I would then go to the city, and I'd go to the art houses that used to be there then. So there was the Elgin Cinema, which is the Joyce Dance Theater now. There was the Paris Cinema, I think, next to the Plaza.
Yep.
But there was a whole host of art houses which don't exist because you can find all these movies online now. So they all sort of died. But the Elgin, one of the funniest things about the Elgin Cinema, they do double features. I saw so many movies there. I twisted my ankle once after a Bergman double bill because I came stumbling out and I could barely, it was like 2 Bergman movies back to back. I just stumbled on the broken sidewalks and twisted my ankle. One of the funniest things about the Elgin Cinema was that they kept running The King of Hearts with Alan Bates. And they would keep teaming it up with other movies. So if you went there on a regular basis, eventually you ended up having to see The King of Hearts, which actually was a fairly good movie. But they just kept combining it with things to the point you actually ended up seeing it at some point. But the Elgin was wonderful. One of the things that I loved was there was a barber chair in the basement. I don't know where it came from or what its story was, but I would get there early and I would jump in and I'd sit in the Ziegfeld was another great one. And I'd sit there and I'd wait for the movie to start. I'd go upstairs. The theater 80 Cent Marks is now, the building is being sold, because I went by there the other day and it's like, oh my God, that's another one down. And I don't know who got it. The Carnegie Hall Cinema, I was a member of the Thousand Eyes of Carnegie Hall Cinema in the basement of the Carnegie Hall. But what I realized was all the movies I saw in all of these theaters were usually much abused 16 millimeter prints of classic films, especially the Carnegie Hall Cinema. But I was watching TV one day. Oh, the Thalia was great. Oh my God, yes. It was just, there was this whole 80s realm of theaters. You're just bounced from one to the other.
I like the Guild. I mean, they would show contemporary stuff, but yep. I just love the vibe of the Guild, which was by Radio City Music Hall. That was
they were just it was classic. You could just wander. You could spend a day just going from one to the other. But one day I was watching TV. I had Turner Classic Movies on the SD channel, not the HD channel, because I wasn't paying for it. And Fritz Lang's M came on. And Fritz Lang is one of my influences. Fritz Lang was definitely an influence on Stanley Kubrick. They do the same centrist framing and things. There's a lot of similarities. Kubrick is like my God, and what happened was I decided to watch the opening of M. And it was like, oh, I haven't seen this movie in years. It was Peter Lorre's first role, major role, at least. And I start watching it, and my jaw drops because it's gorgeous. I mean, it's Fritz Lang cinematographer, I think ended up Carl Freund, oddly enough. I think ended up shooting I Love Lucy. I mean, they were using him for American TV, but he created the concept of the 3-camera shoot for sitcoms that Desilu made into like basically the whole industry ended up going with that. At a certain point, you could just shoot the things like a stage play and just keep going, and the comedy worked. But it was beautiful. I mean, good prints of classic black and white movies have so much nuance, and my jaw dropped, and I suddenly realized I'd never seen any of the movies I'd watched, that I'd seen bad low-res prints of them, but I could go back. So I spent one weekend, I found every Dr. Mabuse movie made. I found the silent one that Fritz Lang did, the 2 sound ones. They did a few others afterwards, and I found beautiful prints of them online on a digital streaming service, and just sat there watching these movies. And I'd been long enough that I didn't remember the plots, so I was able to enjoy them all over again. But yeah, the Elgin, God, I miss the Elgin so much. I've seen things at the Joyce. It's a lovely dance theater. It's a great dance space. But those classic art houses of the 80s were just, oh my God, they were wonderful.
There was actually one in Baltimore called the Charles, which, I was talking about it. It's $33 for 10 movies, and they would do but that included double features. So I went to a Peter Greenaway festival, so it was like Prospero's Books and The Cook, the Thief. Or there was one night where it was like I think Little Odessa and Smoke, and it was just these weird, like these interesting juxtapositions, and I think it might still be there, but I don't think that they're showing those kinds of movies there anymore. Plus they still have the Senator, where John Waters premieres all of his films.
Oh God, yes.
Yeah.
I finally watched Multiple Maniacs, which was so sick, but I just, Divine was amazing, and she was so very good at that, what she did, and seeing her in this movie I'd never seen her in. I'd seen Pink Flamingos, I'd seen a lot of the later work, and that thing with polyester. I mean, she was brilliant. But yeah, John Waters. I have a friend who knows him and is always telling John Waters stories, but he established himself and created something new. That was the secret for me. Was I would see films by people like John Waters. I would look at these movies, the French New Wave, the Italian, New Wave that came out, all these things. And what I realized was that the skill set that I had was for cinematic storytelling. I had a visual sense, I had a story sense, and that those two things combined became a third thing that was bigger. And I'm actually getting 2 short films I did in the 80s transferred to digital so I can put them up for the family to see. One of which won an honorable mention at the Chicago International Film Festival, which I should have taken more seriously at the time, but c'est la vie. But I'm looking forward to seeing them again. It's a lovely thing.
It's good.
Anything else that we should...
You just circled to the thing that I was going to ask you, which was how your experience making films feeds into your storytelling, but you've pretty much done that, which is great.
Well, but let me give you a quick answer to that, though. In addition to that, I spent 20 years writing kids' TV. I got a job coming out of college through a professor of mine, referred me, they gave me the job. I started as a PA trainee, ended up writing when the writer trainee left. I got my first stuff done. I actually was watching the first script that I ever wrote on the old show, Vegetable Soup, that it was on. But I had 20 years of writing things that were half-hour stories, maybe 10-minute scripts, and having immediate feedback, having to, A, meet a deadline, which got me to stop not finishing stuff, B, got feedback from a lot of story editors over the years, and was doing largely stuff for kids that was trying to get into their heads and put new ideas into their heads. So for 20 years, I learned how to manipulate minds, starting with young minds, but those skills apply to adult minds as well. And what happened at the point that I finished the novel, at the point that I started editing video, I always felt like I was a jack of all trades and a master of none. But what I realized at a certain point when the first novel came out was, wait a minute, I'm a storyteller. Everything I do, the producing, the editing, the writing, it's all about telling a story. When I'm editing an interview, it's finding the narrative and cutting 20 minutes down to 3 minutes that tells that well. And I've gotten really, really good at that. But all of that fed into the fiction writing. By the time I started seriously writing fiction, I knew how to tell a story, which is the thing I'd been missing when I first started writing. I was into the words, I was into the language, and I realized that storytelling trumps language. There are some terribly written books from Dan Brown and Jacqueline Suzanne who are hits, but they're great stories. They may not be well written traditionally, but they're great stories. People want stories, and they don't care how badly written they are, as 50 Shades of Grey proved. I could not get past 3 pages of that without being worried it would ruin me as a writer, because I might in some way think that was good writing and start writing like that. So I had to stop. But the story was there, and that's what sells. And I realized that that's what I learned to do in years of writing kids TV. I learned story structure. I learned how to get inside emotions, how to manipulate them, how to play with them, how to evoke them. And that has just made the fiction writing 100 times better than it would have been before all of that.
Well, that's great. I think this is probably a good point to wind down.
Start winding down.
But I want to thank Terence for his awesome, super creepy story, and the view into his process. It's always a pleasure to talk to Terence. And as we've discussed, his most recent story is Out There and Out There Screaming. And it really, really is a wonderful book. And also recently in The Canterbury Nightmares, which you should also
I want to promote that too, because I love that story as well.
And pick up his vampire novels so that you can be all prepared for when book 3 comes out, because that's important.
Oh yes.
And thank you for everybody who's tuning in now and who listens to this recording later. We will be back next month on the first Tuesday of December, and our readers will be TBA. Although I can't say that because it's
I love them.
Well, because it's a holiday season, it's going to be family themed in some way. But, we have a very generous interpretation of family. So, always prepare for a surprise. And thanks to everybody. And please, if you can, leave a donation at the Our Wolf PayPal at paypal.com/pay, PALME/Our Wolves to help keep the series going. And we'll see you all soon. So thanks very much.
And thank you, Amy and Jim. This was a delight. Great fun.
And thanks to Jim. Yes, of course, obviously. Yes. and to Barbara, who would have been here.
Who told me it's okay to wear my headphones.